Morning. We are going to open with song today. How Firm a Foundation from the Green Teal book, number 197. Stand as you're able. Announcements. We'll start with announcements from our Zooming friends. I see Teresa.
Yeah, can you hear me? Unmute. Can you hear me? Okay. I wanted to thank everyone for every single donation that was given. All of the pieces just come together for us to assist the families at Family Promise. And this time, I actually was able to meet a family that is getting ready. I mean, they were getting their apartment. And the spirit change within the family from when they first come in, and there's like a more reserve, and then when they're about to get their own place, it's like they're blooming. It's an uplift of their spirit. They're so close, they're going to get their own place. It's just so neat to watch that transition that they go through when they get the help that they get from the community, and we're in our help, we're part of that. So I want to thank everyone for their donations and the meals. There is an Almost Home open house today from 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock. So if anyone would like to go and see that home in all of its glory and all of its challenges, there's also the opportunity of volunteering. If there's any little thing that you feel could be run better and could where you could assist, or if you have any solutions or problems. I mean, the challenges are many, and the solutions can be individualized for each group that comes through. That we also have a video challenge for those of us who are online, and occasionally everything blacks out, and I don't know if it's a Bluetooth video between the camera and anyone's phone, or where the camera is talking to, or if it's a bandwidth issue. I'm not able to analyze it within the meeting house, but if everybody could just turn their cell phones on airport mode, maybe we can see if that helps with the video. Just as we're watching, I don't know if it's showing up on the recording or not, and that might help us diagnose where it's coming through. But anyway, if everybody could just hit airport mode, then that'll help as we try to figure out what's going on there. So thanks to everyone for all your participation. Everybody's welcome to go to Almost Home and check into that program more and see what we're able to accomplish.
Guilty. Anyone else on Zoom have an announcement? Thank you, Teresa. That was a lot of information. All right, anybody here locally? A couple of them. Please start with your name when you give an announcement. You know your name.
Hello, my name is Ruby Ballinger, and as you may or may not know, I am the owner of Love and Lily Bracelets, which is my bracelet business. Lily is my best friend with Down syndrome. I love her with all my heart, and she was one of my favorite people. All profits from my sales go to Down Syndrome Indiana to support people from like my best friend. I will be set up in the dining room after meeting. I hope you will donate. Thank you.
Okay, you all know where to find Ruby after the meeting.
Mary Dooley. After Cindy shared her pilgrimage with us, and I suggested there might be interest in doing that here, several people, at least 7 people, contacted me. So I'm going to be meeting with Cindy and getting more details, and we'll get concrete about planning such a trip and see if we can actually do it. If you're interested, just let me know.
I'm Beth Simons, and I need help again with a newsletter. I need someone who will be willing to come to the church and run them off to mail. We only have 23 people we mail to, but I know they appreciate getting the newsletter, and it's a drive for me to get here to do that. So Rita said she would help, and if I could get somebody else, that would be very, very helpful to me. And also, writing group meets today.
Anybody else? Okay, I have a real quickie little, just for fun, announcement. On the bulletin board, I've put a little clipping out of the Terre Haute paper, one of our favorite places for many of us. Turkey Run State Park has been voted by some national committee or other one of the 10 best state parks in the country. So I agree. I think it's wonderful. So just of interest.
Oh God, we are reminded this morning of those things that fill our hearts with great joy and happiness. The birth of grandchildren, our joy in watching them grow and develop and become mature and loving human beings. Oh God, for the gift of family and for the joy that young people bring us, we are grateful this morning. Thank you, God, that they save us from cynicism and from despair. From them we learn the centrality of joy and play and eagerness. Oh God, we are grateful. We are cognizant also, O God, that many in our world are hurting now. The victims of war and hubris and greed that leave so many left out. O God, where we are culpable, teach us. Open our eyes that our lives may be lived with open-handed extravagance and generosity. Forgive us our fears, O God. And open our hearts and our spirits that we might live in a spirit of love and compassion, and not fear and distrust. Bless the work of our hands, O God, and let our daily work bear testimony to your values and highest aspirations. Let whatever we dedicate our lives to be worthy of your highest calling, to build, to create, to repair, to mend, to love and to heal, and not to diminish, O God, or destroy, but to lift up and heal. This is our prayer on this first day morning, O God, that we might be your instruments in this world. Amen. Well, let's gather food. Michael, I understand you would like to help with that. And Jimmy, are you going to grab a basket then too? All right. Very good. Thank you. again.
Quakerism is far from a comfortable faith. It is full of queries. Are you? Have you? Then, as one grows in the silence and in the development of the craft of hope, there comes the realization of another thorny growth, the inability to avoid responsibility for the suffering of others. Let your lives speak. The challenge George Fox threw out 300 years ago has not lost its barb. Do I? Am I? Should I? There are no easy answers in the Quaker way.
Well, Craig Reesner, so glad to see you, friend, and to have you back with us. He came in today and he said he had a Phil Gulley haircut. I'm just glad to know. I'm glad to know that I'm starting a trend. Oh, my. Well, Mike Goss and I rode our motorcycles up north to Quaker Haven Camp last week. How many of you have ever been to Quaker Haven? Raise your hand. Okay. And Karen hailed, I think you met your husband Bobby up there. All right. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's... Oh, beautiful place. Nestled on the shores of Dewart Lake in Kosciuszko County, which is itself named for the Polish general Tadeusz Kosciuszko, who came to the aid of our nation during the Revolutionary War. After naming the county for him, the good citizens of the county named their county seat for his nation's capital city, Warsaw. When he died in 1817, Kosciuszko's will specified that his U.S. assets were to be used to educate and free the enslaved people of America. One never knows the full glory behind the naming of a county. It had been about a dozen years since I'd been to Quaker Haven. Hadn't been up there in quite a while. And as we approached, we were about 10 miles out, the battery on my iPhone was down to nothing. So I had to dead reckon the last 10 miles or so. Fortunately, as a child, I had watched the Daniel Boone show and knew that moss grew on the north side of telephone poles. So I found my bearings that way and eventually delivered us to Quaker Haven. The next day, heading over into Ohio, we passed by Amish homesteads with their tidy gardens and pastures of spring colts and crowds of children. It was so picturesque. I wished I were Amish until I remembered they couldn't have motorcycles. I have an Amish buddy down near our farm. His name's Andy. He looks just like Marty Feldman on Young Frankenstein with the hump that moves from one side to the other. And Andy's just a great guy, and whenever I see him, he asks me to come by after dark to take him for a ride on my motorcycle. He says, it will have to be dark. I don't want the bishop to see me. Some folks have bishops, some have Bibles, and others of us just try to find our way by the moss on telephone poles. We're all just trying to find our way, aren't we? But as Anne reminds us this morning, there is no easy way. No easy way. You remember when you were a kid? I don't think they do this anymore. They don't have to because we have maps on our iPhones. But when we were kids, the gas stations would give away free maps. And I would pore over them, spending hours at a time at our dining room table, studying our state, tracing the roads and the rivers with my finger, reading the strangest names of Indiana towns and counties and cities like Pumpkin Center and Kokomo and Kuskioska. On Sunday mornings, I would go to St. Mary's Queen of Peace Catholic Church and be taught that the chief purpose of religion was to satisfy our innate need to worship someone or something beyond ourselves. And I believed that for a long time, mostly because it was told to me every week, and we tend to believe those things that get told to us every week. So I believed it for a long time, that was our greatest need in life, to worship something beyond ourselves. But now I wonder about that. I am all in favor of awe and amazement, of walking through the world with a sense of wonderment and gratitude. But now I think our deepest need is to know how to read a map. To know how to read a map, how to find our way through life, how to navigate the maze of our lives wisely, charitably, joyfully. Our deepest need is to know how to live, how to discern and do the right thing instead of the wrong thing, and how to tell the difference between the two, because sometimes it just isn't easy. When we think about it, I mean carefully and deeply think about it, it occurs to us that most of the Bible, and not just the Bible, but every sacred text elevated by a religion, are actually at their heart just maps. They're maps meant to show us the way. What we often forget is how wedded those maps are to a specific culture at a specific time, and how time has rendered a good many of these maps inaccurate. New roads have been built. Some towns have died off, others have sprung up. Time has altered those maps. Today, there are people navigating life in the 21st century using maps created in the 1st century. Of course, some parts of those old maps are still useful and accurate. The Sermon on the Mount is as good and fresh a map today as it was 2,000 years ago. But have you read the book of Leviticus lately? Or Paul's letter to the early church? You'll notice some parts of the map are faded by age and torn by time. When we were at Quaker Haven, we went down to the beachfront the evening we were there. It was a beautiful evening. And I overheard a counselor tell a young camper that everything she needed to know was in the Bible. And I so wanted to intervene and say it wasn't so. But I hadn't been asked to be a counselor, and no one had asked my opinion. I'm starting to recognize that now. So I went and I got a Coke instead and watched the sunset, which was a far more pleasant endeavor. I tell you, friends, if you're ever faced with the choice between correcting someone's theology and drinking a Coke and watching the sunset, pick the Coke and the sunset, okay? I'm just telling you this after years of experience in these things. So there I was, drinking my Coke, watching the sunset with Mike, and discussing Abraham Lincoln with Mark Tope, a fellow Quaker pastor. But back to maps. Maybe 15 years ago, JB, I think this is when you told me that story about 15 years ago. He was telling me the story about when he was being recorded as a Friends minister over in Indiana yearly meeting. And the recording committee met with him in this room, a group of solemn, mostly men, I assume, if Indiana yearly meeting was then the way it is now. And they asked him during this process if Jesus was the only way to God. And JB drew a map of Indiana showing the road from Richmond, where the meeting was being held, to Indianapolis. And he said to him, here's how I get from Richmond to Indianapolis, drawing an image of Interstate 70. But if I lived in Lafayette, I'd get to Indianapolis this way, and then drew a picture of I-65. They didn't like JB's inference that there were other roads to God besides their own, and JB never did get recorded in Indiana yearly meeting. Yeah. I suspect JB grew up reading maps too. Yep. What map do you read? What map do you read? What guides you in life? Science? Reason? Tradition? Your sense of compassion? They all had their place. In 1978, the book Chesapeake by James Michener was published. I was 17 years old, and Lee and Mary Lee Comer were the youth group leaders at Danville Friends meeting, and they invited me to attend before they realized what that might lead to. And so I went. And Chesapeake, if you've ever read the book, has a Quaker family in there called the Paxmores. And as I read that book and watched that family's life unfold, especially in the years of their anti-slavery work, I was deeply moved by their compassion and care for others. So as I was reading about Quakers in the 1600s and 1700s, and attending a contemporary Quaker youth group, it kind of formed a perfect storm for me. This novel that described these Quakers who had such moral clarity and courage, and then meeting with contemporary Quakers who were similarly moved and motivated. I didn't know how to express it at the time, but I eventually realized that I had been handed a new map, a new guide, unlike any other map or guide I had ever used. Sometimes what we discover is this, that the maps in our lives aren't written on paper, but in people. I can't count the times I have been uncertain about the path I should take. And as I was wrestling with that in my mind, one of you would come to mind. And I would sense almost immediately what I needed to do and how I needed to be. My course became clear. I was watching Cindy's talk from last week, and it was again such a moment for me. That was a wonderful message she brought. Just wonderful. It became abundantly clear to me as I was watching it that Cindy Striedelmeyer is a bright and trustworthy light by which we can illumine our way. All these years, we have been admiring Mark's intelligence, and it never occurred to us that he got that way by spending time with Cynthia. Thank God for people whose lives are a light unto our path. Thank God for people like that. I want to ask us to do something a little bit different today as we enter open worship. I'm going to offer a little more guidance than is my habit. I would like us, as we enter open worship, for you to think about the maps in your life, written on paper or in people, whatever their source. And if you feel led to stand and share with the rest of us the guides and maps you have found so helpful.
I want to share a map because it was made so clear to me when Phil was talking about going to Quaker Haven, and then JP's map. I believe it was James Furby at Quaker Haven years ago, and we were very fortunate to have a really good, enlightened counselor. We were sitting on the bank of the lake, and the sun was setting, and sunbeams were coming in all directions and coming up over the sand and over the trees and over the children and the counselors. And they said, look at this, all the paths, and they're leading back to the sun, as all paths lead back to God. And that was a map that I feel we can all follow today, as Phil was saying. So some of those old map readers have really done us well.
I think my main map readers would be the first people that you see in your family, which would be my parents. The way they treated others, their involvement in the community, giving back to others, their involvement in their, yes, Quaker meeting. Those were are my people that I try to live up to, and I'm sure it's probably true for a lot of you that your parents were your first teachers and your first guides.
I will share that one thing, and I know I've shared this before, but my grandma, who we called her Maga, but Phil knew her, and Leah and Mary Lee knew her, and not sure about anybody else from here, but she was a Quaker woman, and she was always about taking care of everybody. And she worked at Opportunity Cottage, and she took care of the little kids at church and all these things. But one day she said, they lived right next to Phil, actually, and there's a train tracks that runs behind, a little distance away, but she would tell us how you always feed the bums that come from the train tracks. Not a good way to say it now, but that's what she said. And because you didn't want to, you wanted to feed even the ones that didn't deserve it, because you definitely don't want to miss anybody who does deserve it. So I just always have remembered that from my grandma.
This is Pam Smith. I have a similar story to Debbie's with my grandmother also. But I think along my whole life, there have been many people that helped me along the right path. You know, my folks, my extended family, my grandparents live right down the street from us, so we spent a lot of time there. Teachers, bosses in jobs that I worked in. I still have some that I just look back so fondly upon, but my grandmother also would feed any vagrants that would come by, and my grandfather kept wondering why they kept finding her. Well, what they would do, they would draw a little thing like on a fence post or a tree, and it was a cat, and it meant a kind-hearted woman lives here. And then they would know that they would get food and help there.
You never know where you'll find your map maker and what he will show you, but when I started college, I came from Richmond, Indiana. I was very conservative and very reserved, and I met a guy by the name of John Stewart. His name, everybody called him Jocko, and the thing that Jocko taught me was that there's good in every person. Every person that Jocko met, he welcomed in. And that was unusual for me because that's not the clique that I was used to. But he found something positive in every person that he met. He shared that with others. And if you would ask anybody who was with Jocko, who was Jocko's best friend, he would say, I am, because that's how he made you feel. And when Jocko passed away unexpectedly at an early age, there was a celebration of life, and over 1,100 people showed up, from the street musician to people who had gotten awards for accomplishments. But everybody who met Jocko felt that warmth, felt that spirit in him, and I hadn't thought about Jocko for a couple of months now, but Bill's sermon made me think of that one person who made such a change in so many different lives.
Are all hearts clear? All right. Then please stand again and we'll sing number 239, same book, A Mighty Fortress is Our God.
glad you mentioned Jim Furby. That brought back a lot of good memories. Wonderful man. I remember when Joanne and I had just gotten married in 1984, and Jim and his wife Ethel were in Florida wintering, and Jim had a stroke and couldn't drive, and he asked us to come and drive their car back home while they flew. So we met them at the airport. And he gave us the keys and instructed me not to go over 40 miles an hour and allowed 3 days for the trip. And so I had a cousin in Gainesville, so we drove up to Gainesville, spent 2 days with them, and then drove hell for leather that third day from Gainesville back to Plainfield, where we lived at the time. But my first memory of Jim Furby was in 1981. I just began attending Plainfield Friends meeting, and Jim Furby spoke there that day, and he gave a message that just rocked my world. It was just so insightful and so rich, and I remember going up to him afterwards and asking him, because it was such a good talk, that I thought, oh, it must have taken him forever to write that talk. And I was thinking about becoming a minister myself, but wanted to know what kind of time it would take to write a message like that. So I asked him, Jim, I said, that was a beautiful sermon. How long did it take you to write? And he looked at me and he said, 52 years. 52 years. Remember, friends, when we write our maps, we're not going to just rush home and do it in one day. We're going to dedicate our lives to it. We're going to dedicate our lives to it, our hearts and our minds and the best resources we have within us and without us. And it takes a life. It takes a life. Yes, friend Mark.
I failed to mention that Susan had a bit of an accident with a limb yesterday.
Oh.
She started pulling on a big limb, bigger than she should have, slipped, slid underneath the end of it, scratched her leg, made a nice big bruise. And she didn't even go to her church today.
Oh my gosh. Well, let her know we love her and we're thinking of her. And that is a important reminder to the husbands to make sure their wives are safe when they do yard work.
I was safe in my chair.
Friends, turn and greet one another and live this week as if you're writing a map for someone.